Is Christianity ineffective? If the Christian faith offers a universal cure for a universal problem, then why hasn't it done more good in the world? Those are the questions at the heart of John Wesley's sermon, Causes of the Inefficacy of Christianity. I've linked that sermon in the description below so you can read it for yourself. The sermon was written late in life, and it represents Wesley's critical analysis of the problems that keep the Christian faith from doing the most good. And I'll tell you now, Wesley doesn't pull any punches. My guest for this conversation is Dr. Chris Bounds, professor of theology at Asbury Theological Seminary. He's the author or co-author of multiple books, including this one, Holiness, a biblical, historical, and systematic theology. It's one of my highly recommended resources, and I've linked it in the description below so you can check it out. Before we get to the conversation with Dr. Bounds, give me 30 seconds to tell you that this episode of Theology Project is brought to you by Wesley Biblical Seminary. At WBS, you'll find biblically faithful theological education from a distinctly Wesleyan perspective. Whether you're pursuing a Master of Divinity, the Global Methodist Church course of study, or a Doctor of Ministry, Wesley Biblical Seminary is committed to developing trusted leaders for faithful churches. To learn more, visit wbs.edu or click the link below. Now, let's get to the conversation with Dr. Chris Bounds on John Wesley and the barriers to Christianity's effectiveness. Dr. Christopher Bounds, welcome to Theology Project. Glad to have you on.
Good to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
I am too. Before we get started, I'll mention you have been now teaching for 25 years. This is your 25th year in the academy, Asbury University, Indiana Wesleyan, and Asbury Seminary now. You've undoubtedly taught many classes, and there are undoubtedly some of your students are watching this very podcast, listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube channel.
I wouldn't doubt that.
I want to invite any former students or current students of Dr. Bounds, if you're listening or watching YouTube, Substack, wherever it is, leave a comment and tell me what class you had with him and what made that class awesome, because I know it was awesome. So tell us, want to hear.
You may be taking that by faith.
It's coming, man. I can't wait to see what people say. Well, Chris, I'm so glad to have you on. I've enjoyed the chance just over the last few years to get to know you. Just so people know a little bit, we've had the chance to work together on a few things. You came to Birmingham for Reconstructing Methodism a couple of years ago. And then we were in West Virginia earlier this year talking about holiness in a Nazarene context. So, and I think that may be where we said, hey, you know what, let's schedule a podcast later this year. And the format is to basically, listeners who maybe new to the channel, I call up my friends who know John Wesley and ask them if they'll come on the podcast to talk about a John Wesley sermon, and they get to pick which one. And so I think we were in West Virginia, and mentioned this to you.
That's right.
And you immediately said, let's talk about Causes of the Inefficacy of Christianity, which is not one of the more widely read sermons. It's not one that's like, it's not in the standard sermons. So tell me, like, without hesitation, what made this sermon the one you want to talk about?
I think there are a number of things that drew me to this sermon, one of which it is written 2 years before John Wesley dies. And it's actually published in the Arminian magazine a year before Wesley dies. So it expresses John Wesley's sort of mature thoughts and reflections. But the question that he asks, that he poses in this sermon, is incredibly fascinating to me. And that is, why is Christianity so ineffective? If it in fact is the healing balm for the problem of sin and the depths of sin in human heart and human society, why hasn't Christianity done better? Why has it not been more efficacious and effective? So the question is fascinating to me, and it's a question worth reflection, worth thinking upon. So hearing Wesley's words on it. And then second, another reason why I think I'm drawn to this sermon is I am a theologian. I particularly focus in systematic theology and dogmatic theology. And the very first thing that Wesley mentions for the causes of the inefficacy of Christianity is that he recognizes even where Christianity exists, it is so little known.
Mm,
And when he says that, what he really means by that is what we would call basic Christian doctrine,
yeah.
basic Christian theology. And Wesley in this sermon points us in something that we've neglected in our Wesleyan tradition, the understanding of sound doctrine as a primary means of God's grace. When we think about the means of grace in our Wesleyan tradition, we have not normally thought about theology or sound doctrine as a primary means of grace. And yet, Wesley, this is the very first thing that Wesley mentions in this sermon. So, those are at least two reasons why I'm really drawn to this sermon.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it gets me thinking about the relevance of this sermon for today in many ways, right? Because surely there are people asking, for all the grand claims of Christianity, why isn't it like why hasn't it done more good? And there's plenty. I mean, at one level, when I was reading through the sermon last week, you know, Wesley feels a little pessimistic, like, well, a lot pessimistic, really, because like how many hospitals have been launched, and how many people have been cared for, how many orphanages, so much good has been done in the name of the church. Clearly, um, aberrations and evil has been done as well in the name of Christ, wrongly so. But it is, I mean, I would imagine, particularly in our Western context where we're kind of moving in a more kind of secular direction, that people are looking and saying, hey, Christianity claims to be this religion where Jesus saves you and turns you and transforms your life, but now I see ethical issues in the church and cover ups over here and like
Yeah.
why so there's that. And then the other thing, when you mentioned doctrine as a means of grace, I can't help but think about how in the Global Methodist Church we spent a lot of time over the last year working on doctrine and the
Mhm.
Articles of Faith project as well. So yeah, I mean that's interesting. So connect the dots for us a little bit in terms of Wesley's concern and today's pastor. Is
No,
this
no,
still the question for the church today?
no. I think this is what is before us today. I think for me to frame an answer to the question that you're posing right now, I'm reminded of Athanasius on the incarnation of the Word.
Yeah.
And you will remember in Athanasius, how can you recognize the truth of Christianity?
Hmm.
And Athanasius' answer to that, he gives a multifaceted answer to that question. But one of the answers that he gives is look at the lives of Christians, look at the lives of the martyrs. Then the time that Athanasius wrote on the incarnation of the Word, the church had just gone through probably the worst persecution in the first 300 years of Christianity, the Diocletian persecution. Look at the martyrs. You'll
Hmm.
see the truth of Christianity. And
Yeah.
then look at the lives of Christians in your lives. You know what their lives were before they became Christians, and you see how they live their lives now.
Hmm.
That appeal that we see in Athanasius. I'm not so sure today
Yeah.
that we would make the same appeal. You want to see the truth of Christianity, to look at the lives of Christians. I'm not sure that that is what we would say to today.
Yeah.
But John Wesley is concerned about how can we know that in fact Christianity is true. And for him, it is about, to use the language that is found in this sermon as well as throughout the Wesleyan corpus, it is a rediscovery and experience of what he calls scriptural Christianity.
Hmm.
And not just knowing it intellectually, but embodying it
Yeah.
in soul and mind and heart.
That's interesting.
It's necessary.
It when I was reading this, it also made me think of the general spread of the gospel, because in that sermon he has this phrase, the great grand stumbling block to the advance of the
Yes.
Christian, which is interesting because you've got at one place in Wesley you've got the grand deposit, and then you've got the grand stumbling block, which is an interesting interesting contrast in his thought. But for him, the grand stumbling block to the spread of the gospel is basically the unholiness of Christians,
Yes.
which is kind of the themes overlap with the sermon we're looking at
That's
today.
right. And he is wanting to emphasize true scriptural Christianity and the experience of true scriptural, and yet recognizing, which he does in this sermon, that it has its own pitfalls,
Yeah,
that even the very success of scriptural Christianity, if you are not careful, will actually lead to its demise
yeah.
as well.
Now, in the kind of you and I are both reading the critical edition of this, and we've got Albert Outler's comments at the beginning, and Outler mentions Wesley. So he's got this question: Christianity claims to have this universal remedy for a universal evil, is the way he puts it. But its actual performance doesn't really feel like it always lives up to the claim. Sometimes far below. And Aller mentions that Wesley was unsatisfied with kind of predestinarian, Calvinist, Reformed answers to the question. So I'm curious, like, flesh that debate out a little bit for us. I assume it has to do with in the first couple of paragraphs where he mentions some might say, well, we're all just super corrupted, but he's not satisfied. He's not willing to like let corruption be the excuse, is he? So is that
No,
part of
no,
what's
he's
going on? Flesh that out a little bit. I'm
No,
curious
no,
what your
that's
thoughts.
exactly what's going on. I should preface this because Wesley's experience of the Reformed tradition is not the magisterial reformers. This certainly isn't John. I mean, this is not John Calvin,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not the magisterial reformers at all. Nor is it the scholastic reformers at all. So John Calvin, magisterial reformers, the scholastic reformers actually have a very high view of holiness.
Mm-hmm.
They are not antinomians living as if there is no law. They take
Yeah.
seriously holiness. They take serious sanctification. But the Calvinism or the Reformed tradition that Wesley is dealing with in the 18th century has certainly leaned into and has drifted away from actually historic Reformed teaching
Mm.
and has really drilled down into the depths of human depravity, the depths of original sin, and has fallen into a pessimism about the degree to which human beings can be redeemed from the problem of sin. So I want to say this: Wesley is dealing with a form of Calvinism, but please don't paint historic Calvinism or the
Yeah.
historic Reformed tradition
That's a
the
helpful
way
distinction.
that it was experienced and existed in 18th century England. But
Yeah.
that was what the Reformed tradition was saying. Why has Christianity been so ineffective? Because of the depths of human depravity.
Yeah.
That is the reason why.
My impression has been, and you can help me with this, like I remember years ago coming across this little volume of Calvin sermons, John Calvin sermons. And I thought, oh, that's neat. I'll read a few of those, see what he has to say. And I was stunned by the way he talked about holiness. I
Yes.
mean, you could use the language of entire sanctification to describe the way Calvin talked about holiness in his sermons. Which I was not expecting. Like there were times where I was thinking like this sounds like John Wesley.
Yes.
Some of the things he says about believers should not sin and those kinds of things. So
Absolutely.
that's what we mean when we're talking about kind of the magisterial reformers, the classic reformed tradition. By the time you get to 18th century British predestinarianism, if I could put it that way, the posture is more, well, God. I'm going to paint with a kind of a caricature here, but I think it does the trick. The God has chosen who He will save. His decrees are irrevocable, and that means my actions have no bearing or consequence. And so, even if He saves me, I can live how I want to live and sin how I want to sin, and it's still by His unconditional decree, which is a caricature of classical Reformed theology. And so and I think a lot of what Wesley is responding to is that sort of misapplication of Reformed theology.
Yeah, certainly that is what he's one of the things that he
Yeah.
is responding
Not just in this sermon, but in others as
but
well.
in
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
sermons, and of course that exists within its own Anglican tradition, and it's being manifested as well in the Free Church tradition
Yeah.
that exists in the 18th century.
Yeah, that's helpful. You mentioned, and we'll say this, and then we'll kind of get into some of the text of the sermon. This is late in life, so he's just turned 86, I think. This is written within months after he turns 86. It is interesting. I don't know. I don't think we said he didn't actually title this sermon causes of the inefficacy of Christianity. That got attached after he died. That title, but it's appropriate, I think. um,
That's right. That's right.
so he's in Ireland. He's 86 years old, and he's thinking about the future of Methodism and the movement. Um, just put this sermon in a little bit of the context of Wesley late in life and what his hopes for Methodism, his fears about Methodism. Like what's he afraid of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that this sermon needs to be seen in the context of other sermons
Mm,
to help you get a broader context of what Wesley is addressing here in Causes for the Inefficacy of Christianity. Sermon 122
yeah.
is what is simply labeled when it's published in the Arminian magazine. But in 1786, 3 years prior to this, he has another sermon called Thoughts Upon Methodism.
Mm,
And it's in this Thoughts Upon Methodism that there is this famous quote that is often remembered in among evangelical Methodism. And Wesley confesses in that, I do not fear the day that Methodism will cease to exist, either in England or in the United States or in the world. But what I fear is that it will become a dead sect, that it will have a form of godliness, but it will not have the power of godliness at work within it. And surely this will be the case if Methodism neglects, if Methodism forgets its doctrine, its spirit, and its discipline.
uh,
So he's already beginning to think about what might happen. He recognizes, yes, what Methodism is experiencing is what he called scriptural Christianity. Scriptural Christianity is known among the Methodists, but he's thinking about the future and
mhm.
some of the pitfalls that are going to be in the future that will lead Methodism down a road that it will become a dead sect.
Yeah.
And that would be doctrine. And so you
Yeah.
can see this in Causes for the Inefficacy of Christianity. The lack of spirit and discipline. And again, you can see this reiterated
Mhm.
in the Causes for the Inefficacy of Christianity.
So late in life, that kind of becomes his framework for thinking about what a successful Methodism looks like, and break down that difference between form of godliness and what was the contrasting term?
Yeah, but denies or
It's
has not
spirit,
the power
the power.
thereof.
Yeah. So form of
Yeah.
godliness, power of godliness. Flesh that distinction out a little bit. What is the form? Are we talking about liturgical forms? Are we talking about something else there?
Well, again, a community
Yeah.
that is called Methodist,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, at this time, that is the Methodist Episcopal Church. It's
Mhm.
actually a formal church
Yeah.
in the United States, and it is sort of a movement
Yep.
that exists within the Anglican Church within England. So they will continue to exist as an institution, as an organization, as a formality, but the ability to be able to bring about true scriptural Christianity, holiness of heart and life among its members,
Hmm.
it will be powerless to
Yeah.
do so. It, in fact, will be. It will be a part of the inefficacy of Christianity, that Methodism will become a part of the inefficacy of Christianity.
Wow. What a remarkable, after a lifetime of work on it, to be able to say that at the end of your life. That's like a, I mean, in many ways, it increases my respect for Wesley for his sort of willingness, the self awareness, I think. He doesn't sort of, hagiography isn't the right word, but he doesn't just sort of assume, hey, this thing that I built's going to be awesome. Because I
That's right. It's
built
going
it,
to
obviously.
continue on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So for him, you can have an institutional church, you can have all of the trappings of polity. You can have bishops, you can have elders, you can have worship services, you can have choirs and organs and all the things, but you can lack power. And he's worried about after he's dead, will
Mhm.
Methodism maintain the transformative power that he witnessed in his lifetime?
That's right. That's right. And there are another series of sermons as well. His thoughts on Methodism, and we talked about this earlier before
Yeah.
the broadcast. But he also writes, on the use of money
Hmm.
and the danger of riches and the danger of increasing riches and self-denial.
Yeah.
He's also writing that in the 1780s.
Hmm.
And you can see that thought and reflection, the dangers, the pitfalls that are associated with money. It's found in the causes for the inefficacy of Christianity as
Yeah.
well.
It sounds to me like there's room for a doctoral dissertation there. If I mean, it's probably already been done, somebody probably wrote that book. But that kind of what the later Wesley looking at Methodism after his death, particularly around pitfalls for the movement. Somebody should,
Someone should do something along this. Actually, I don't know of someone who's done
that's what
that.
I'm like. I mean, you would know better than me, but off the top of my head, I can't think of anything.
No, I
But it
can't think of
seems
anyone
like a
either.
Wesley and his perception of his legacy seems like
Yeah.
surely
The only
somebody
person I know who's
worked on
done
that.
something along those lines has been James Pedler,
Okay,
uh, who is former Salvation Army.
okay,
I think he's Free Methodist now, but he's done it in regard to ecclesiology and
interesting.
actually the problems of ecclesiology coming out of John Wesley and coming
Ah,
out of early Methodism,
yeah,
the problems that it's caused in the
that's
history
interesting.
of
Well,
Methodism.
let's talk about some like so. Let's work through what the inefficacy, the causes of the inefficacy for Wesley. So he starts with, and I think a couple just to frame it up for listeners. He starts with the kind of the broadest possible brush, and really particular makes it more particular every step of the way. Kind of this broad Christianity, isn't it known throughout the world, and it's this broad thing. And um, but his first complaint is, and the way I've kind of framed these up is absences. Right. The problem
Yes,
is
yes.
an absence of one thing, an absence of another thing, and then a further problem is the absence of another thing.
As a
Um,
matter of fact, I've developed an alliteration of it.
okay.
Uh, an absence of doctrine, discipline, and denial.
See, I had absence of doctrine in the notes, absence of doctrine, absence of discipline. My alliteration is not good because I went absence of generosity and then absence of self-denial. So yours is far better than mine. Yours will preach. That's what it is. You gotta.
Well, I so rarely am able to do that, have that rhetorical skill. And so I do take maybe a little bit of, can I say, sanctified pride in being
Yeah,
able
there
to
it is.
come
There
up
it
with
is.
that.
It's interesting though because at one level, I mean, so when you read Wesley's sermons, they are usually very structured. First, we're going to
Yes.
do this. Second, we're going to do this. Third, we're going to do this. And this one, he doesn't actually spell it out that way. Like oftentimes, if you're reading the standard sermons, he'll do the introduction and then he'll spell out, here's the three things I'm going to talk about. He we discerned the structure, but he doesn't quite spell the structure out that way. So it's a little, I mean, I don't want to say he was being sloppy, but it wasn't quite as organized maybe as other.
No, no, not at all. Wesley, if you read his sermons, you see with what great clarity he writes, and the logic and the flow
Mm.
of his arguments. It's clear. I mean, you can see his training in
Yeah,
logic.
yeah,
You
clearly.
can see his training in rhetoric, but it's not here
Mm-hmm.
in this sermon, which makes it's difficult. So it's interesting. You just said you pointed out four things, and I think you're right in
Yeah,
regard to that. You notice that I said only
three.
three.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of those ideas flow through two of them.
Yeah.
Flow through two of them.
Yeah,
But
that's right. And
he's not clear. He's
it's
not clear.
interesting as I read it last Thursday and then looked back over it today, and I got the last two that I had mixed up in order. I was thinking you did self-denial before the generosity stuff and so again it just sort of speaks to there is a discernible structure, but he's not as kind of on top of it as he was earlier in life, perhaps. Which is a helpful reminder just of the very, I think one of the things that gets me about Methodism, particularly Wesley, is how it's easy for us to sort of take our theological heroes and put them on a pedestal. And if you get into Wesley stuff, like he was just, he was a real like brilliant and sometimes weak and amazing contributor and sometimes idiosyncratic. You know, like he just such a, when I read his stuff, I'm like, how brilliant and how feeble he is all at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you might know, again, my area is systematic theology. So a part of my area is constructive
Hmm.
theology, doing constructive work. And so a lot of people ask me, what do I do with Wesley? Well, I constructively appropriate Wesley. I constructively appropriate him. And I think, to look upon him, that's what you have to do. You have
Yeah.
to constructively appropriate him.
Well, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail. I promise we're coming back to the sermon, but I just in the last couple months, as I've had the GMC Articles of Faith at the top of my desk for months now. And I'll say to listeners, Dr. Bounds, back in the spring, gave us some crazy helpful feedback on that. So I want to say thank you to you. Just so people like he, along with other theologians inside the GMC, and you're in the Wesleyan Church now, is that right?
Actually, still in the United Methodist
Okay,
Church,
okay.
still, and
Uh,
trying to discern
which way?
my
Okay.
steps forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we, as part of that process, we sent the Articles of Faith out to theologians in the Pan Wesleyan movement, if we can put it that way. And Chris was one of the folks who contributed to a lengthy, we called it the amicus brief, I think,
That's right.
sort of a document that I read many times. And a lot of it is now in the proposed Articles of Faith. So thank you for helping us see where we could have phrased things more clearly, and appreciate your contribution to the doctrinal life of the Global Methodist Church. But that is as I they're in working through the articles, there are times where I wish Wesley had been more systematic. um,
Yes, yes,
because he doesn't
yes.
say everything that you
I do as well.
yeah. So for example, just one of the things that's come up is the doctrine of creation in some ways. And so the Articles of Religion don't have a doctrine of creation. The EUB Confession of Faith don't have a doctrine of creation. Every theology textbook in Protestantism has a doctrine of creation, right? So it's a standard theological topic. Somehow our doctrines don't have it. And um, in some of the conversation that I found myself in has um, conflated creation, theology of creation, and theology of salvation, soteriology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as I like, so I'm asking, am I missing something in Wesley? Because he has a lot of pessimistic things to say about human beings in our natural state, if we can put it
Mhm.
that way. And he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about created goodness. He does generally about the world before the fall. He's got some sermons on that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's a standard basic Christian orthodoxy is God doesn't make evil substances. He doesn't make evil things.
Mhm.
Um, and so as I'm sort of hearing some pushback on, well, no, Wesley had a crazy pessimistic vision of what it means to be created human. And I'm looking for sources. I'm going, well, he never denies the goodness of creation, but he also doesn't systematically expound it like every systematic theologian in the Catholic and Protestant tradition. So I found myself going, man, this is why we need
Mhm.
systematicians. This is why we
Yes.
need to be reading Methodist theologians in the 19th century, like William Burt Pope and others, because they do work in the Wesleyan tradition that Wesley never did.
Yes.
Because instead of writing an Institutes of the Christian Religion kind of thing, he's out on horseback preaching sermons, trying to save the lost. So it sounds like as a systematician, you feel the pain there.
I feel the pain. And not only that, that has been a part of the great problem from my perspective in our Wesleyan, our Methodist tradition is
Yeah.
we don't naturally think systematically. We
Mm.
don't think theologically in that way. And this is a strength of the Reformed tradition. This
Yeah.
is a strength of the Catholic tradition. This is a strength of the Lutheran tradition. And we could learn
Mm.
from them in this regard. But we have in many ways paid the price for it.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, it is interesting in this sermon, Causes for the Inefficacy of Christianity, when he talks about a lack of doctrine, ignorance of sound doctrine. One of the things that he talks about is that Christians have no understanding of the natural and moral attributes of God, and then he begins. We have no understanding of particular providence, the providence of God, and related to what you just said, the providence of God. Closely related to the providence of God is the doctrine of creation. Creation and
Exactly.
providence are intimately held together. And so he acknowledges it. He himself doesn't sort of systematically develop or articulate a doctrine of creation and providence.
I want to say, well, I think he takes it for granted.
He does. He does.
Um, because again, it comes up here and there, but it's like, I think Wesley is thoroughly orthodox. The things that don't get greatly developed are things that he takes for granted, I think.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's little clues along the way that he does. He's like, this is what this is what the Bible says. It's what the church teaches.
Yeah, that is right. And he points to systematic articulations of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
For instance, his favorite appeal, at least in regard to theology, is Pearson's, on the creed.
Mm-hmm.
And he, even in the ordering of what he thinks that Christians need to know that they're ignorant of, that has led to the inefficacy of Christianity, he's following the order of what we find in Pearson's work on the
Yeah.
creed.
So Wesley, even though he did not systematically, he didn't write a systematic theology or even a basic Christian doctrine kind of thing. Nevertheless, he did say that an absence of doctrine, right, is a cause for Christianity's ineffectiveness.
Yes.
And so I think you say a little bit more about um, why doctrine is essential for effective Christianity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least for Wesley,
Yeah.
I think that it has everything to do with it being a primary means of grace.
Mhm.
And so, again, in regard to our
Let
doctrine
me
of
let me
God,
emphasize that. Say that again. Doctrine is a primary means of
primary
grace.
means of grace.
Yeah,
And
flesh
so
that out.
Wesley talks about these instituted means of grace. He talks about general means of grace. He talks about prudential means of grace. But again, Wesley never really talks about, although
Mm.
he intimates it, but he never quite calls it a means of grace. But he certainly points to it here in this sermon and in his thoughts upon Methodism, that we will just become a dead sect if we lose the doctrine, the spirit, and the discipline. These are the means of grace for him. So sound doctrine, sound teaching is one of the primary means that God uses to transform us into the image and the likeness of Christ. I mean, Wesley doesn't say this, but it's quite possible, and Wesley would say this. It's quite possible to know about God and not love God.
Mm.
It's possible to know about God and not love God. I mean, this was what we see with the devil. This is what we might call dead orthodoxy. So it's possible to know about God and not love him, but it's impossible to love God and not know about him.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know about him, then what we love are our ideas, our thoughts, our idols that we have formed in our mind. And he does actually uh, touch on that in some other sermons that he writes. But if you go on in regard to doctrine, it's not only our doctrine of God, it's the doctrine of Christ, it's the doctrine of the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
He talks about knowing the offices of Christ, knowing about the redemption of humanity, the operations of the Holy Spirit, of justification by faith, new birth, inward and outward sanctification, inward and outward holiness. If we do not if that is not communicated, if that is not um, begin to be apprehended by people, then most likely it will never be experienced in the lives of people. Both our idea and experience of God, as well as what Wesley considers to be, at the very heart of redemption, new birth, justification, new birth, and sanctification.
And it's not just for the clergy, right? I mean, he's not saying this is what the
No.
preachers need to know. For Wesley, I mean, that's the thing you get about this sermon specifically is basic basic Christian theological concepts. He says that the church is ineffective because Christians don't know them. It's not just the professional preachers.
That's right, that this is meant to be understood, to be apprehended. I won't use
Yeah.
the word comprehended, but certainly apprehended
Yeah.
by every person who calls upon the name of Christ,
Mm.
who is a Christian, and more particularly here for Methodists, for those who embrace and have experienced scriptural Christianity. By the way, I'll say this. I think one of the most neglected aspects of Wesley's writings, and I think it's important, is his children's catechism or
Oh,
his lessons for children. And it's worth looking through
yeah.
that because that has a fairly sort of a systematic approach, as much as Wesley has, a systematic approach to what he considers to be the essentials that certainly should be communicated to children.
Yeah.
And then also it has to do with not just the doctrine, but also for the discipline and how our lives, the tempers are formed, how our
Mhm.
desires are formed and shaped. But anyway, lessons for children, it's children's
I made a
catechism
note on that. I want to go
is
and look
something that
it
has
up.
often been overlooked.
Yeah.
And I think this should be recaptured and maybe even developed more than Wesley has, but he has at least a good skeleton and maybe the beginning of the fleshing out of a really great catechism
Yeah, that's
that is there.
interesting. Really helpful. He mentions in this section where he's talking about absence of doctrine, um, as well, the what he calls the analogy of faith.
Yes.
What does he mean by that?
Yeah, the analogy of faith for him is sort of a governing lens through which all the scriptures should be read.
Okay.
In other words, we can see throughout the scripture this sort of grand movement. And he begins with, and he doesn't begin with the doctrine of God in the midst of this, which is missing from my
It's really
perspective.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. He begins with original sin,
Yeah,
and,
that's
and,
right.
and the depravity of human nature. And then he talks about justification by faith. He talks about new birth, and he talks about inward and outward holiness. And let me just say this, interesting here, this is probably his most succinct statement of the analogy of faith. There are other places where he mentions it, but this is his most succinct, clear statement on it.
Interesting.
But again, it's a lens through which to read and understand the scriptures. But again, I wish that it didn't begin with the fall of humanity and the
Yeah.
problem of original sin. It began with creation. It
Hmm.
began with God here, the nature and attributes of God, which he talks about earlier in this section.
So when you say lens through which to read the scriptures, are we sort of say, is he like, walk us through, he's thinking, all right, member of the congregation, lay Christian, when you're reading the Bible, you get up in the morning, you open your Bible up, you pray, you read the scriptures, read it to with a view to how it names your, like, how it illumines these your own natural corruption. Let's see, he says here, natural corruption, justification by faith, new birth,
New birth.
inward and outward holiness. So
Yeah.
when you say lens for reading the scriptures, is he wanting Methodists and others to be have their Bibles open and asking, all right, how does this instruct me? How does it function as a means of grace in relation to reveal my own corruption, to mediate regenerated grace?
Yes.
What's he getting
And
at?
not just my own, but all of humanity as
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just my own experience of justification, but the larger work of justification, the redemption of humanity,
Yeah.
and inward and outward holiness. And so, again, sometimes what happens in the reading of Scripture, now, again, this analogy of faith that he has, and I say this with great reverence to my dear brother, Dr. Ken Collins, who is our genuine Wesley scholar. You know, my analogy that I would use would be it would be different. It'd be tweaked
Hmm.
from Wesley here. But The problem is trying to make sense of the parts that we have in Scripture. And so, how do we make sense of the parts? Well, we need something to guide us in making sense of the reading of the parts of Scripture. So, we certainly see, say, for instance, in the opening chapters of Genesis, I'm talking about chapters 3 through 11. We have a picture of the depravity of humanity. And then chapter 12 with the call of Abram, who will become Abraham. We have the beginning. And then the call of Israel. We have the beginning of the working of redemption. That is there, that is leading us to justification by faith, new birth, and then to have the law of God written upon not tablets of stone, but upon human hearts as well. This inward now.
Yeah.
So trying to make sense of the parts of Scripture. And again, Wesley recognizes some of the difficulties that can come in reading the Scriptures and the need for some sort of way of making sense of the parts in light of the whole.
That's very helpful. I'm thinking too about when I'm thinking of doctrine as a means of grace, and he's going to keep going, right? Doctrine is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. How about that for
Okay.
effective Christianity? Can we say
Yes.
it that way?
Yes. Yes.
Necessary but not sufficient. You also have to have discipline and self-denial. But
And I apologize. I'm just going to
no.
say this again. For Wesley's perspective, and I'm going to use different language, if it is not communicated, it will not be experienced.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
And so this is the reason why it's got to be communicated. And if it's
Yeah.
not communicated, it's not going to be experienced.
So this getting back to the why we need to be thinking about this in the Pan Wesleyan movement right now. Just had a conversation with your colleague at Asbury, Dr. Joel Chop. I think his office is across the hall from yours.
Yes.
And we were talking through kind of the two strains in Methodism over the last 100 years, 150 years, where when we look at confessions of faith or doctrinal standards, and he had a site, I think from Paul Chilcote, on how he said something to the effect of, I don't have this in my notes because I wasn't planning on bringing this up. It just came along in the conversation that in Methodism we tend to not look at doctrinal standards as these kind of binding, constitutive,
That's
rigorous
Chilcote's
things.
argument.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the argument he makes.
And
Whereas,
hence we're non-confessional
right, so it's the
from
argument that
Chilcote's.
Methodism is non-confessional as a tradition. So we have the Apostles' Creed. He even lumps the Apostles' Creed in there, which is fascinating to me. But Apostles' Creed, Articles of Faith, confession, or Articles of Religion, EUB Confession of Faith. So we have these documents, and I forget the word that the 72 discipline used, but it was a phrase like landmark documents or something like that.
That
So
is
they're not.
it. Landmark
Is that
documents.
it?
Yes.
So they're not
That's what they're
doctrinal
called.
standards; they're
They're not
landmark
doctrinal standard.
documents. So they tell us what we did, what kind of these historical claims, but they don't really govern us, perhaps. And then on the other side, you've got sort of a more William Burt Pope style confessionalism, where he really wants to say that the confessions flesh out the essential things that aren't in the creeds and they're binding, right? And so, like the way Wesley talks here, he really sounds like he's in the precursor to Pope stream, because if doctrine is a means of grace, it can't just be a landmark document.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make
No, no,
sense?
absolutely, absolutely. And this would be my sort of doctor father, the influence in my life. The person I worked under, Tom Oden, would
Yeah.
make very clear in his own work with Wesley.
Yeah. So I think it reiterates that Methodism for the last probably 50 or 60 years has been subjected to, maybe I won't go as far as to say an anti-doctrinal posture, but certainly a posture that de-emphasizes the importance of doctrine. And that should be held in contrast to what Wesley says in this sermon, that the number one cause for the inefficacy of Christianity is an absence of doctrine.
No, absolutely right. I will just add this. I think that the problem is much longer than
Yeah.
50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to Friedrich Schleiermacher, the rise of modernity, the rise of theological liberalism, the training of Methodist pastors Methodist theologians in Germany,
Hmm.
the height of theological liberalism during the Civil War, the formation of Methodist seminaries after the Civil War, trained by these
Yeah.
German theologians. And so, I mean, there's a long history
You may
that
know
is
this
here.
reference. I want to say, I think it's in Tom McCall's chapter on scripture in the big D.A. Carson book, where he rehearses kind of the Wesleyan. I think it's in that. It may not be. He cites somebody who is doing some historical work at the turn of the 20th century. So I think early 1900s. And he's noting at that time the shift in Methodism.
Yes, yes.
Does that sound,
Childs.
who's, what's that?
It's Childs. The
Yeah.
name of the book is Theological Transitions in American Methodism.
I knew you'd know it, man. I knew you'd know it.
Yeah. Child's famous work
Yeah.
there.
So I mean, we're talking early 20th century, and it would, if it's happening there, it started before that.
But that's right. That's right. We're getting the thrust of it. I mean, there was a sense in which theological liberalism was sort of at its last gasps in the late 1960s, in which there was the formation of the United Methodist Church, United Brethren, the Methodist Church coming together, and it's seen in what is done with the doctrinal statement
Yeah.
in 1972 that is going to finally be corrected. I know you come from a United Methodist background in 88,
Yeah.
in which landmark documents, the language of theological pluralism is going to be
Yeah.
removed,
Yeah.
yeah, from the doctrinal standards.
Um, I'm tempted to tell a story that about when you and I were in West Virginia. I don't know if I mentioned this to you. You just mentioned me coming from Methodism. When we were doing the panel in West Virginia,
Oh, yes, yeah.
you mentioned you described me as sort of an outsider to the holiness movement or something like that, or a latecomer maybe. Like how
That's
encouraging it
right. I
is. Do you
use
remember
some
this?
sort of language
Yeah.
like that.
And which was I loved it. It was really fun for me because like I just wrote a book on holiness and I'm thinking like we're going to recover holiness in the global in Methodism and all this kind of classical Wesleyanism. And the first time I go out into like a holiness tradition church, I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm not part of this." I'm a former United Methodist, right? So it was a great
And
moment of
I
self-awareness for me. I love it. Thank you for that gift. Like this is helpful. I didn't grow. It was a good reminder, and it's good too. I think for the Global Methodist Church to remember, like the holiness tradition is a tree with many branches.
that's right. That's
We
right.
would do well to pay attention to the Nazarenes and the Free Methodists,
That's right.
and
They much more formed. I talk about this as well. Much more formed by the American holiness tradition than it is by John Wesley.
yeah, that's right. So it's been fun for me as a latecomer to the holiness tradition. And really, I mean, I'll just to fill that in. I was in college the first time I read Plain Account of Christian Perfection. I was already a candidate for ordained ministry, and I went in to one of my pastors with the copy of Plain Account, and I was like, "Why hasn't anybody ever told me about this?" Because it seems like it should have been kind of up there. And it just even in the best United Methodist churches in the late 20th century, you weren't going to hear about Christian perfection.
No, no, not at all. And that's a little bit different than my own tradition in
Yeah.
United Methodist. I grew up in a United Methodist. When I say grew up, I was raised as a new believer in a United Methodist church that had heavy still remnants of the American holiness tradition that was
Okay.
operative in this church that really did believe entire sanctification in Christian perfection was a normative Christian experience.
Very
A norm
atypical then.
rather than something experienced late in life or towards
Yeah.
the end of life. No, it was a normative Christian
That's in
experience
a
for
United
every.
Methodist
That
setting.
was in a United Methodist
So
church.
that's pretty atypical then.
Very atypical. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anything left of that in
Yeah.
the United Methodist Church.
Fascinating.
I'd be very
Fascinating.
surprised if that is the case. But as you know, I've navigated between, being in sort of historic Methodist circles as well as being in the American holiness
Yeah.
tradition, yeah,
Well,
as
I
well.
think that's one of the reasons I love just having these kind of conversations with you is the breadth of experience. It's really really helpful to me. All right, so we've talked about the absence of doctrine. That's the first necessary condition for effective Christianity. What's the second one?
Yeah, the second one is lack of discipline.
Yeah.
You remember he has this quote, it is the body and soul that make up a human being, but it is doctrine and discipline
Mm.
that make up the church. And so the need for discipline. And I'll say this, he doesn't spend much time on the issue of discipline.
Yeah.
But he does recognize that that is absolutely necessary. To sound doctrine, there must be discipline. And obviously, in the context that Wesley's talking about here, he's talking about accountability, and he has in mind the societies and classes and bands
That was going to be my next question. So
that
he's
are here.
thinking about that group structure.
That's right. He's thinking about the group structure. And if you remember, if you read closely Causes for the Inefficacy, he recognizes that Methodism has doctrine and discipline.
Hmm.
They have doctrine and discipline.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me how he sort of this is where, like I was saying earlier, he starts broad and then zeroes in. So it's kind of broad Western Hemisphere Christianity, basically. And Christianity's known, but it's not effective because even in places it's known, its doctrines are not well known. And then he zeroes in. He's like, the Methodists though. The Methodists got doctrine and discipline, so we're doing better than. It's kind of like we're doing it better than everybody else. But he's almost setting you up just to knock you down, isn't he?
He is. He is. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've got our doctrines down. We've got everybody's in a band meeting and a class meeting. We're doing that. But then he takes us straight on, and he doesn't, like you said, he doesn't devote a lot of time to the discipline piece. I'm assuming that's because it's just so well integrated into the movement at this point.
Absolutely. To be a Methodist is to be a part of a society, and to be a part of a society is to be a part of a class meeting. You can't be a Methodist without being a part of a class meeting. Now,
Right.
the bands are a little bit they're optional,
Yeah.
but you're definitely involved in a society, and you're definitely involved in a class meeting.
And
That's required. You can't be a Methodist without those two.
and a Wesleyan class meeting is more intense than, a small group.
It is. Well, as you know, at the heart of the class meeting is accountability for doing no evil. You
Mhm.
know, an examination of doing no evil, do no harm, doing good. You know, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the widow and the orphan and those who are in prison, taking care of them. So doing good, and then attending to all the ordinances of God, what we would traditionally understand to be the instituted sort of means of grace. So this and then within the context of the class meeting, there's spiritual care that is taking place, money that is being given to take care of everyone. The care of souls, so to speak, is taking place in the class
Yep.
meeting.
So when he says discipline, he's not just sort of saying like church discipline, you sin, we're going to kick you out, that kind of, because sometimes you hear church discipline and it's that excommunication thing.
No, that's correct. He's
I,
talking about being organized to beat the devil, if I
yeah.
can, one way to put it, or organized to uh, to lead to holiness of heart and life.
One distinction I'll sometimes make is you have corrective discipline and formative discipline. Maybe
Yes,
that's a distinction we could use. So the class meetings is he wants people to be formed. He says you're not going to grow in holiness unless you're a part of one of these groups where there's accountability, not just you know service level accountability, but real life on life kind of thing. So number one, doctrine. Number two, a class meeting of sorts is what he's looking for, class or
yes.
band or both.
Mhm, mhm.
So that's, but still, just that doesn't get an effective Christianity for Wesley.
That's right. And I will say this within the class meeting and within the societies, there's both the corrective and formative discipline
Yeah.
that is taking place. As
Say
you
a little bit more
remember,
about that.
yeah, John Wesley didn't mind, cleaning the rolls
Yeah.
of Methodism for people who were not actively participating in classes and being accountable for that, or were taking advantage of it, not seriously engaging in the class meeting for formation. There
Yeah.
could be corrective discipline as well, and it would take place within the class meetings
Yeah.
as well.
I've thought that for the corrective discipline to really be effective, the formative discipline has got to be high value for people. Or else you just like,
Absolutely.
or else you just blow your group off and do something else, right?
But you're absolutely right in regard to Wesley. And what he has in mind for discipline here is both the corrective and formative.
Mm,
It's correct. But oftentimes we only think of discipline in regard to the corrective form. You're right. That's
yeah,
where our minds naturally go. And but there's this formative discipline.
yeah,
And I think here it's what he principle. It's not that it's completely divorced from corrective discipline, but it is principally what he has in mind here as a formative
yeah.
discipline.
It's not a full-on negative. Discipline's not a negative word for him.
No,
Not at all.
nor is it in historic Christianity.
That's right. Yeah,
It's not. It's the third mark of the church in our Protestant tradition.
yeah.
In
Good.
the same way that we talk about the preaching of the pure word of God and the due administration of the sacrament. Wonderful, beautiful, awesome. Well, the third mark, the community rightly ordered,
Yeah,
this discipline and accountability, it should be viewed as glorious and beautiful as the word and sacrament, word, sacrament, and order. Yeah.
yeah.
But we don't view it that way because we don't understand it as a grace,
Hmm.
as an expression of the grace of God
Yeah.
to our lives.
I'm hopeful. I do think multiple branches of that big Wesleyan family tree we're talking about appear to be attempting to recover that, I think.
Yes. Thanks
Not
be to
just
God.
not just the GMC, but I see it across, Wesleyan Church, Nazarenes, Global Methodists, some United Methodists. It looks like some Salvation Army space. It looks like something that's coming back in some ways, which is beautiful. All right, so this is where, as we get into the third thing, I'm reading this sermon, and again, for all the Wesley I've read, I hadn't read this one before, so I'm reading it last week for the first time, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is like standard John Wesley, like doctrine and discipline. That's right, right. And then I get to the third spot, the third one, and it feels like a bait and switch. All of a sudden he's talking about greed and money, right? He's gone from
Yes,
you need to know
yes.
your basic Christian doctrine, you need to be a part of your class
With a little
meeting.
bit of fasting thrown into that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's like, but if you're not, practicing radical generosity, fasting, and doing everything you can to be not taken by fashion. He
Yes.
mentioned something about Methodists being consumed with fashion, fashionable dress or something like that. Then you'll be tied up in an ineffective version of Christianity. So I guess you said you put all of that in the absence of self denial or absence of denial.
Yes, yes.
Flesh that out some.
And again, I think that Wesley's sermons, and by the way, Odin does this in his 4 volume teachings of John Wesley, and he does this in the fourth volume of this. He ties the use of money, the danger of riches, the danger of increasing riches, and self-denial, which are all written around the same time together, that they are intimately related.
Yeah.
And so Wesley is convinced that the lure of money and holding on to it is really the gateway to the whole demise of scriptural Christianity.
Yeah.
And his fear is through doctrine and through discipline, that scriptural Christianity will lead to its own demise. It will undermine itself because you begin to help people to learn how to work with their money and to earn all they can, to save all they can, and then hoard it as opposed to giving it away. And he believes that the love of money, not money of itself, money not in and of itself, but the love of money is the great threat. And it leads to pride. It leads to self-will. It leads to what is it? 1 John 2:16, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes,
Yeah.
and oh, what is it? Desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes.
Pride of life
Um,
is the other one.
yeah, yeah, and the pride of life. That's what will lead to it, and so he really harps. I mean, this is where his focus is, and if I might say, I might think in many ways. This is Chris Bounds that maybe the sign, not a sign, but the sign of sort of our covenant faithfulness to God the sign as I'm thinking more historically within Christianity, I think maybe it's what we do with our bodies sexually. What we do, it's the sign of our covenant faithfulness with
Yeah.
God. That's Chris Bound's talking about. But for John Wesley, I think it's here with what we do with our money.
Is
And
that
if we're not careful, money will lead us to our own destruction. As he says in this sermon, as he does in other places, if we earn all we can to gain all that we can and not to give it away, then we are twice the children of the devil,
hmm,
as we were before we even became Christians. And he uses the language of hell. I mean, he uses the absolute strongest language possible to talk about the problems of riches, not the problems of money, but the problems of increasing riches, the problem of riches, the problems if with money we are not the wise and godly and sanctified steward of this money that God entrusts into our care.
so there's a greater responsibility for someone who has he's got it, he's not denigrating a work ethic. He wants you to work hard and earn, like he's got his phrase, earn all you can, save all you can. But that earning and saving has got to be met with a posture of generosity.
Yes, yes.
And
And
so
he
he
has
wants
very
to put,
definite ideas about what that looks like.
yeah, he
And
quite does.
oh
Uh,
my, yes.
and so, but he wants to put an extra level of responsibility on the person who has earned and saved a great deal.
Yeah. In the end, as I said to you, Wesley fears that Methodism will not cease being a group, a
Mm.
society, a church, but it will not have the power of
Yeah.
godliness. It will become a dead sect. And most assuredly, it will do so because of it will have lost its doctrine and discipline and in spirit of Methodism. But in other places, he's very direct here as well,
Yeah.
that what will lead to the demise of Methodism is the love of money,
Mm.
the love of money.
Yeah. That's a, I guess, a prescient warning for us, isn't it?
It is. And I like this. This is another reason why I'm drawn to this sermon. Is I am
Yeah.
reminded of his warning
Mm.
again in the use of money, the warning in the danger of riches, the danger of increased riches, self denial. And so one of
Mm.
those places in which the practice of self denial is in the giving away of our riches, the giving away of money.
Yeah. So there's a sec I think in the sermon on self-denial, he basically says if you are not practicing it, you don't come after Jesus, you come after the devil, basically. You're not a follower of Jesus, you're a follower of the devil. I forget the exact quote.
No,
It's a
no, no,
very
that's
striking
exactly
quote.
right. That's what the fall is
Yeah.
all about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my will, but your will be done.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so
and
I think about that alongside, and there's a little C.S. Lewis in here as well, where for Wesley, holiness and Christian perfection is other oriented love, a heart full of love for God and neighbor, self or other oriented love, and and which entails self denial. And so for him, he doesn't emphasize the other oriented love so much in this sermon, but if you read all this, like you read his whole corpus together, those two things belong together. Lewis, I want to say C.S. Lewis remarked once that the virtue is not self denial. I don't know if you're probably familiar with this quote, but his comment was the virtue is not the abrogation of the self, but in the giving of the self. And so even here, well, and I think you see it here too, right? In the
oh,
giving piece,
yes,
right? So
yes,
for
yes,
Wesley, the other oriented love is in giving to the poor, right? So
yes.
even here, you have fasting, but it's met with charity.
Mhm.
And so he's not just commending some sort of ascetic, um, go into your room and never come out and never see anybody else and deny yourself and that sort of thing. He is commending a self denial that is then embodied in a posture of radical generosity and love for neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. It is that. And he is concerned about that. And again, Methodism's involvement with the hungry, with the naked, and particularly here in the sermon, it's caring for other Methodists
Yeah.
as well. It's beyond that, but that's his real focus. You know, he makes reference to the Quakers, how good the Quakers are at taking care of Quakers, how the Moravians are so good at taking care of the Moravians. And again, if you remember, it's in the class meeting where there's the taking up of money and the giving of money to be able to help other Methodists.
Is that the primary function of the offering in the class meetings, is care for the poor?
That is at least a principal part of
Yeah,
it.
a
Yeah.
big part of it. Sure thing. Absolutely. Well, it seems like there's a lot there. If you were going to sum up what this sermon has for the Pan Wesleyan movement that right now, how would you put it?
Yeah, I would say here's why I love the sermon so much is because it has within it the resources, the depths of understanding of the human problem,
Mm,
and the depths of grace in Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit to overcome the human problem. And oftentimes, what we have done in Methodism in our Wesleyan tradition, we have focused on one of these to the exclusion of the others, and how all three are necessary. And so I don't think that in our Wesleyan tradition we have given enough thought and reflection to the point of implementation in our process of making disciples, sound doctrine, discipline, and self-denial. And again, for Wesley, in the end, these are all a means of grace. These are grace-oriented actions. These are grace-oriented means
yeah.
in our life. And so I love it because, again, in my own observation in our Wesleyan tradition, we may focus on one of these. Sometimes, oftentimes, we're not focusing on any of these. But to take seriously all three of them, and including, even as you mentioned, the issue of money and the problem
Yeah.
of money, and it's something we have to deal with, particularly within our American society,
It sounds
Western
like
society.
you're suggesting this sermon kind of gives us a framework for ministry,
Yes,
um,
and discipleship,
discipleship,
and
like,
for formation.
and I'm
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about that just as a pastor, where uh, and having pastored churches that are very program driven, if I could put it that way, where we've got this program, that program, there's this constituency, that constituency, and a lot of them are doing really good things and they're doing ministry with different folks. But the 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 sum total is the church exists to sort of run these programs, not so much the church exists to catechize, uh, disciple, create accountability, and then put people in a position to practice self-giving, other-oriented love. But it sounds like there's a process there, right? So you're shifting.
Yes, yes.
We could be commending a shift from programmatic ministry to process-oriented ministry, where the process is um, sort of the. You know what I'm thinking of? This is a. I'm thinking of the classical trivium at one level.
Oh, yes, yes.
So grammar, logic, and rhetoric, where grammar is the building blocks of a subject, logic, you begin to integrate those various building blocks, and then rhetoric is the outward facing communication. And it almost sounds like with Wesley, what the basic doctrine piece is the grammar of the Christian faith. God
Yes.
is a Trinity. Jesus is the is one person with two natures who died for our sins and was raised on the third day. The Spirit applies the work of Christ. And analogy of faith, justification, new birth. Those are just the basic building blocks. And without them, you can't build the faith without those doctrinal building blocks.
Mhm.
But then the organization of people into a class meeting of some sort begins to take the doctrines and integrate them into the various parts of our lives, right? They're not they're not sort of siloed off in this intellectual section of me. They're now integrated into um, if I'm confessing sin in the context of a class meeting, then the the um the offices of Christ become really important. The person and work of Jesus become really, really important in that setting. And then it's maybe it's not a one-to-one thing, but analogically, then that practice of charity, self-denial, and other-oriented love, particularly through generosity and other things, becomes that sort of outward embodiment, the rhetoric stage, if you will. Um, the analogy is probably not perfect, but I wonder if that sort of building blocks, integration, and enacting is a helpful way to think about the process of disciple making.
No, no, I think that's very helpful. That is well stated, Matt. Again, I think what we have here in this sermon are the three key elements for Wesley
Yeah,
of what it is to build scriptural Christianity within people.
yeah, I think that's right. And Wesley was a process guy. If anything, he was interested in how he takes someone from the gutter and brings them into a holistic experience of happiness in the triune God. Um, and and so he wanted to invite, and if it wasn't making a difference, these are the things that were missing.
Absolutely. Again, it is something that, like I said, seeing the relationship is incredibly important, and working towards the integration of those within the context of a believing community
Yeah,
becomes important. And in a very similar way, I think we see the sort of simplicity and yet at the same time the complexity within Wesley's understanding of the means of grace and his distinction between the instituted and the general and the prudential means of grace. And in the end, Wesley doesn't believe the instituted means of grace, which is normally what we talk about with Christian disciplines that we learn, is not enough
yeah,
in and of itself, that we also need these general means of grace. And the general means of grace are not enough in the end. We need these instituted means of grace in our lives as well. And again, there's a sophistication, a complexity, and yet at the same time, maybe a simplicity.
yeah,
But sometimes there's such great complexity even within simplicity.
yeah. It's
But I think we see
eminently,
that in Wesley's sermon, Causes
yeah,
for the Inefficacy of Christianity.
deeply practical, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's something that can be practiced. It is something that can be implemented within any believing community.
Very good. Chris, thank you so much for taking time this afternoon. This has been a fascinating discussion for me. It's created all kinds of thoughts in all kinds of directions. I hope you'll come do it again. We'll pick another sermon and do it
We
again
can pick
sometime. How
another
about that?
sermon next time, but this is my favorite, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, it's been a real joy. Thank you so much.
All right, good to visit with you this afternoon.